for those of you who've been to Chick-fil-A, and just think about what that experience feels like. From the minute you pull into the parking lot, if you're going through the drive-thru, you're going in, like they have sat there and just completely observed and pulled all that apart. What is this step? What is this step? They've thought about what that feels so that, next time you'll come back. But the same thing can happen with your employees too. Like, let's think about it. Like, how do you recruit them? Well, you've got a career site. All right, well, what does that feel like? How easy is it for people to apply for a job? I don't know.
Hello. Welcome to another Knowledge Bomb episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Jason Anthoine.
And if this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. And if you're on iTunes, go ahead and rate the podcast and leave a review. That helps get the word out to great leaders and entrepreneurs like yourself.
Please help me welcome Jason with the Employee Experience Hack.
Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
I help companies figure out how to inform, involve, and inspire their employees a little bit better. And I kind of got started doing all that because I grew up in Fort Valley, Georgia, which is about, 100 miles south of Atlanta.
Okay.
Most people haven't heard of Fort Valley, and we're only famous for three things. One, we grow all the peaches there, so all the sweet Georgia peaches that people enjoy come from there. And then if you've ever ridden on a Bluebird school bus growing up, world headquarters for Bluebird school buses is in Fort Valley.
Wow.
And then also the fantastic Fort Valley State University Wildcats. Man, I tell you what, there's some good football there on Saturdays, and then that band is something to be reckoned with. So I'm from Fort Valley, and then I ended up going to college in Athens at the University of Georgia. I majored in public relations, and then I graduated on a Saturday, moved to Atlanta on a Sunday, and started doing the employee newsletter for a bank on Monday. And here it is, almost 36 years later, and I'm doing basically the same thing.
Wow. I love that because you talked about the aspect from the employee. How did you get into the understanding and the research? What got your mind in that direction? Yeah, well, I think, it goes back to that Fort Valley story. So my dad was a foreman on the production line at the school bus plant, and my mom was a secretary at the bank. And they would come home every day like all parents do, like you and I do, I'm sure. Yeah. And talk about what a great day it was or what a terrible day it was and why either one of those things are true and what they can and can't do about it. And I guess all that stuff just kind of sunk into me because when I started doing that newsletter at the bank, I was also responsible for doing media relations and press releases and external communications, which I've had to do over my career at a lot of different places I've been. But I'm just more passionate about the internal communications and helping employees have, a better experience at work and making work matter more. And so I think that's where it came from, was just listening to my parents talking about how things were at work for them. And it just kind of sunk in. Wow. My dad, maybe like a lot of dads, he barely got out of high school and, he didn't go to college. He didn't have all these fancy degrees and all that stuff. And that's fine. Not everybody does and not everybody should. So to make up for that, he loved to read. And so he was always reading leadership books and biographies about people, and he would cut out, different things that he would find around leadership and great quotes and things like that, and just tape them to my bathroom mirror or tape them to my bedroom door. Yeah. And so I think it was just stuff like that, just how to inspire people, how to help people see that they can be more than whoever it is they think they are right now. And, it just, like I said, it just kind of sunk in. And when I started doing internal communications at that very first job, that's just a bunch of corporate stuff usually. And there's nothing wrong with it, but that doesn't mean it's right either. Yeah. And it just, over the years, it just felt like, it needs to be more real than it is, because the people who are reading this stuff or watching this stuff, they're real. Yeah. So why wouldn't we just act like we're real, and then we can all be real and just get on with it? And so to me, it's easier to do that, and it's more effective. And so I just started kind of doing it that way, and everybody thought I was crazy at first, but now almost everybody is trying to do it because it works. Yeah, you talking about what, 35 years ago?
Yeah.
That's
So I
amazing.
graduated in '89. So, do the math.
Uh,
That was back
yeah.
when I used to have hair.
Oh man, Jason, that is amazing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about. Let's talk about your mission. Your mission to inform, involve, and to inspire employees in the
Yeah.
workplace to drive better results in the marketplace. Let's talk about that. What does that look like, and how does it work?
So the way I like to think about it is, any company or any organization for that matter, I like to think of it as brand equals experience squared. So
Mm,
your brand, your company, your organization, whatever that is the combination of customer experience and the employee experience. And those two
mm,
things make up what that brand is, what your company is, what your organization is. And companies in particular have gotten real good at customer experience, understanding what they want and what they don't want, involving them in focus groups about whatever the next product launch is going to be. Both, sort of marketing and sales kind of own that experience. Marketing owns the relationship and sales kind of owns that transaction.
yeah,
But companies don't do the same thing when it comes to the employee experience. I mean, it is exactly the same kind of process, same kind of thinking, except substitute customers for employees.
yeah.
And so when you think about sort of who owns the employee transactions, usually it's HR, a lot of times it's IT. But then who ultimately owns the relationship with those folks? Like, how are we going to drive that experience? It's not through like making just the transactions better, it's the whole experience. And so I think, that type of thing and that type of thinking, which companies are already really good at over here when they think about customers, can be
Yeah.
easily applied over the same thing around employee experience. And once you start thinking that way, then it becomes obvious what you need to do to inform, involve, and inspire these folks in the same way that you're already doing it for your customer.
Yeah, that's good. Because here's the thing. I mean, even for the customers, we didn't heard all kind of stuff. Customers are always right. And now you
That's right.
have organizations like Chick-fil-A that has really taken the customer experience to the next level. So I want you to kind of,
Yeah.
on a parallel base from, that customer experience, what does it look like for the employee experience?
Yeah. So a lot of times, if you think about for those of you who've been to Chick-fil-A, and it's probably everybody listening to this thing, just think about what that experience feels like. From the minute you pull into the parking lot, if you're going through the drive-through, you're going in, like they have sat there and just completely observed and pulled all that apart. What is this step? What is this step? What is this step? And all along that whole sort of experience, they've thought about what that feels like to make that feel as good as it can possibly feel so that, next time you'll come back, except for
Yeah.
Sundays. But the same thing can happen with your employees too. Like, let's think about it. Like, how do you recruit them? Oh, you've got a career site. All right. Well, what does that feel like?
Mm.
How easy is it for people to apply for a job? I don't know how many people have done that lately, but usually it's, hey, give us all this information on a resume and a PDF that's attached, and then go over here to these forms and then give us all the same information in these forms. Like, why? Like, right from the beginning, all of a sudden, it's not a very good experience, and there's no
Yeah.
reason for it not to be. And then that follows all the way through, hiring, interviewing, onboarding, 30, 60, 90 days, and 30 years later, if you stay there, like all of that is a sum total of all the experiences that you have there. So what can we do to have the same sort of discipline to make the employee experience as good as we all want to make the customer experience? And all that takes is discipline and thinking things through and what every single step is and how to make even a 2%
Mm.
improvement about that thing.
Wow.
That'll get you a whole lot of way down the road.
Wow, wow, wow. And that's really good. I mean, for an individual to come to work and enjoy their job. I mean, I can imagine how the retention rate is off the roof because of that. What are
Yeah.
some other things besides that? Someone that's loving their job, they're going to continue to, work for this company or whatever.
Mhm.
What are some of the other things or
Mhm.
benefits on why organizations should look at this more?
Well, because it shows up in KPIs and dashboards that are really important to that business. So,
Mm,
it shows up in customer experience, clearly. It also shows up in turnover. It
mm,
shows up in safety incidents. It shows up in quality incidents. It shows up in on time delivery. Like all the things that the business is looking at on those dashboards, if the employee experience piece is off, it's going to show up there. And people are like, oh, that's fluffy. How are we even going to measure that stuff? There's ways to measure it, and it will translate right to those dials that you're looking at, and it will lower whatever your revenue is, and it will probably increase your cost. So I know those two things are important to everybody. So you see all these things online about why people leave the organization. Top 10 list of those things. A lot of people think, oh, it's pay. Pay is usually like 7 or 8 on that list. Like 1 through 6 are not pay in most places. And they usually have things to do with appreciation, respect, trust, treating me as an equal partner, making sure you're sharing the same information with me that's being shared with you so that collectively we can all do these things together. And so to me, it kind of boils down to understanding why it is that people leave. And they don't always tell you the truth on an exit interview, but it's easy to look at any of these reports and they'll tell you. And so whatever that is, you got to start doing some steps to improve those things. So if it's because I don't feel appreciated, well, that feels like an opportunity to, ramp up your employee recognition program or rack up your service anniversary program, and if it's, I don't know what's going on around here, then that is definitely communication. And so a lot of that comes, sort of top down, but the majority of it comes from your manager and your leader and all of your other peers. So what can we do to make sure that all that communication is going the right direction and you're sharing what needs to be shared? So it's things like that. It's almost like what do we not want to have happen? So it's these 10 things why people leave. And then, all right, what's the opposite of that so that we make sure that none of that ever happens? And it's some of those examples that I just shared. I think respect to me in a lot of organizations looks like making sure that the employees are included whenever you're trying to make decisions, whether they're tough or not decisions. So if what you're trying to do is increase the efficiency of this particular assembly line, for example, who better to ask about how we can make that go better than the people who are doing that job all day long, day in, day out for a decade, right? So just asking them for their opinions starts to build respect. That also starts to build trust. Like, what you say matters around here, and we want to know what that is. And there's no better way to build trust and respect like that. So that's just one good example right there, is just asking your employees what needs to happen instead of a bunch of leaders getting off in a conference room and coming up with decisions on their own without knowing those things.
And I hear you emphasizing on, the importance of building relationships with employees. What are some practical steps that leaders can take to create this authentic connection while balancing their own responsibility?
Anybody who's listening to this who sort of lives kind of in the South where we do, Cedric, you know Waffle House. We've already talked about Chick-fil-A, but there's also Waffle House. And so the way I like to think of it is your work is like you're running a Waffle House, right? It's fast, it's efficient, it's all about volume and getting that next order out for that next customer. But your relationships with your team at work is more like a crock pot at home. It's slow, it's deliberate. It's all about slowly simmering this one thing to make it as great as it can be. And the reality is you can't really expect you and your team to work like this Waffle House crew if you haven't both kind of invested this crock pot time in your relationships with each other. And that's literally spending time with folks. And some people will go, well, I walk around and try to figure out what's going on. There's a difference in spending time with your teams just solely to check in with them and see how they're doing versus checking up on them and asking what they're doing. Like, that doesn't count quite as much as a crock pot thing to do. And so do more of that. Like, it's not all about work all the time. It's all about strengthening those relationships so that the work can be better. But if you're not doing that, then you're going to have a hard time getting the work to be better.
Yeah. And I can just imagine some leader right now listening. They said, Jason, I don't have the time. I don't have the time. What would you say to that leader?
No, he's right. She's right. Nobody has the time, but everybody can make the time. I mean, whatever it is that you are doing in your life, either at work or at home, you've decided that that's important. And you have made time for that, whether it's learning how to play tennis or play golf or figuring out how to have the best Excel spreadsheet that's ever been known to man. You've decided that that's important, and you are investing the time to make it work. This is no different.
Yeah.
Nobody has the time. You have to make the time. It's not just about, making the time to do it. It's about being able to make the time to do it. And sometimes those leaders and managers don't really have the permission to do that. And because of the role that corporate communications plays sometimes, maybe we can go have a conversation that they themselves can't. Because if these are the types of things we want our leaders doing and they can't, and they don't have time to do it, then what can we do to give them some time to do it? And that means, what are we going to have to take off their plate? And that sometimes is an easier conversation for us to have than for those people to try and have themselves. Communications is a leadership responsibility. It's not just a department down the hall. There are things that we can and should be doing as a communications team to help, kind of the air cover kind of stuff. But none of that matters if they're not doing all the groundwork. They're responsible, and they're more trustworthy, they're more believable, and they're closer to the work and the employees. And so, that just makes it critically important that they have the time, make the time. We help make the time for them, whatever it takes, so that they can do that. Because, like we talked about earlier, everything like that is just another deposit in the trust bank. We're going to keep putting deposits in there, and every now and then somebody writes a check that we had no idea, and you bounce it and it gets overdrawn. So you got to make as many of those deposits as you can, because the day is going to come where you got to write checks against that, like it or not. And the more deposits you have in there, the less likely it's going to get overdrawn, which means you're going to pay a lot of fees.
Knowledge. This is great. This is great. Here's the thing. We going across generations, right? And I just want to take a journey across generations with the baby boomers and the Gen X and millennials. Now you have the Gen Zs, I believe. Gen Zs that are in the workforce now. I mean, the millennials.
I think we started back at the beginning of the alphabet now, right? There's A, and then there'll be B. Like, there's only 26 letters.
I mean, now we have the Gen Zs here. I mean, and the communication throughout these years is different, and people have perspectives on. I remember when the millennials was like, oh, they're this, they're that. So now the millennials is looking at the Gen Zs like, oh, they're this and they're that.
That's
like
right.
This happened. The baby boomers did it with Gen X. Oh, they're this and they're that. It just happened with every generation, right?
That's exactly right.
So what are some things, because I believe leaders oftentimes make this same mistake year after year. Every generation make this similar mistake year after year, not understanding. And what are some things you think leaders need to consider or think about? Or do you know any book recommendations or anything that we can do to sharpen ourselves in this area of this communication piece?
Well, I think, when we talk about different generations, certainly in the organization, there's still some folks who grew up with print and the phone and a fax machine. Like, it's hard to find a fax machine anymore except in a museum.
Right.
And so they have different expectations. Now, they're also the ones who are on Facebook with their grandkids at home on the weekend. So don't think that they're ignorant about technology. Just because they come from a different generation. And then you've got sort of the whole other end of that spectrum, people who've only known digital stuff. And, fax machine, what's that? Printer, what's that? Like, that's fine, doesn't mean they're wrong. So you've got this whole sort of spectrum of what people like and what they prefer. And to me, the best leaders are the ones who use a bunch of different ways to communicate with their employees based on how those employees like to be communicated. So if you've got, an older generation that's primarily your workforce, face-to-face is going to be great. Sitting around in the break room and talking with coffee, like those kinds of things are going to be great. But if you, have got a much younger, brand new, right out of college kind of generation that's working with you, they want text messages, and they don't want them to be longer than, 10 words. They want infographics. They want emojis. Like, you know how to do all that. You're doing all that at home when you're not at work. So think about who they are and how they like to be communicated with. And if you don't know, just ask them, because they'll be glad to tell you. And then do it that way. Like if everybody's doing it all the same way, it doesn't work for everybody in the same way. So then you're forcing them to do things that they don't do when they're at home, and then that makes work feels like it's totally disconnected from reality. And so do the types of things that meet them where they already are. Yeah, it's a little extra work for, leaders and managers and certainly the comms team, but it pays off. It pays off because it shows up in trust. It shows up in respect. It shows up in a lot of other ways other than I know these people like to get text better than they do emails. It just sends different messages other than what you're communicating.
Jason, another knowledge bomb. This is awesome because this really goes into the employee experience. It's like knowing who they are and knowing how to deal with them, communicate with them on their level. And I think this is really great when you talk about leadership and influence. You begin to build that trust and you begin to influence that individual, into whatever the goal or the mission is. So yeah.
Which, by the way, we've all been doing forever with customers. So this is not a new skill. It's not a new approach. It's not a completely, out of nowhere kind of way to think. We already think about this the same way for our customers. What if we thought of our employees as customers of the place where they worked? I bet we would treat them like our other customers,
Jeez, Jason, this is good.
And in some ways, they are our customers because if they don't like it, they just leave. And nobody likes turnover, right? So you wouldn't want your customers to turn over like that. You're going to do something about it. Why aren't you trying to do the same thing with your employees?
OMG, Jason, man, that is so true because we focus so much on the customer and not on the employee. But wow, what would life
It's
look
both.
like?
It's both. And like I said, the best part about it is it's pretty much the same thing. So let's just take something we already know how to do and do it with these people.
Oh man, you sure right. You sure right. You sure right. Can you
You
real
asked
quick?
about some book. You asked about some books and some things.
Yes.
So obviously there's a bunch of podcasts, including this one. What do you got? 199 episodes out there already.
Yes.
So that's a lot of listening for folks on here to do and learning
Yes,
from a bunch of different leaders.
Yes, sir.
There's a book that I like. The guy that wrote it is named Bob Sutton, and it's called The Friction Project.
Okay.
And he's basically an organizational psychologist. And what he tries to get companies to understand is how smart leaders can make the right things easier and the wrong things harder. It's sometimes hard to break people's habits when it is a habit because it's the easiest thing to do. Well, if you make the new habit the easiest thing to do and the old habit now the hardest thing to do, you don't hardly even have to communicate about it. People will automatically start doing it because it's the easiest thing to do. So the Friction Project, I think, is a good book. And this one is way out of left field. It's called The Old Way of Seeing by Jonathan Hale. And this is a book that, listen, y'all stay with me, how architecture lost its magic and how to get it all back. So this book is about the evolution of architecture, which everybody's like, what the heck does that have to do with what I do all day long, unless you're an architect? So get a copy of this book and read it. And everywhere it says architect or architecture, you just substitute whatever industry it is you work in.
Yeah.
Because it talks about how it used to be and how it is now, and we kind of lost our way. What do we need to do to get back to that? And if you read it with the frame of mind of this is talk about my company, my industry, and what we do, and it's not about architecture, it is just a fascinating way to think about this challenge and this opportunity by looking at what happened in architecture and then applying those lessons to our culture or our company or our industry or whatever else. And it's just a nice sort of crock pot kind of read.
Wow. This is good. Man, this is good. This is so good. I want to talk a little bit about your podcast. Let's talk a little bit about that. Give us the name and what it's about so someone can, come over and check you out and check out what you're doing.
Sure thing. Well, I started it about a year ago, like last week, I guess. And everybody was like, "You need to do a podcast." I was like, "The world does not need another podcast, and it certainly it certainly doesn't need one from me." But if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it my way. So I call it a story cast, just to make sure that I myself think of it a little bit differently. And it's called Riding Shotgun with Jason Anthoine. It's available wherever this one is, and all your other podcasts are. And it is literally me telling stories of the fact that my whole career has been spent riding shotgun with other leaders at organizations large and small, and understanding the decisions they've made and the paths they've taken. And so now I'm inviting people to ride shotgun with me while I tell them all those stories. And the good thing about it is none of the episodes are longer than about 7 minutes.
Wow.
And it's not scripted. It's not overly slick. Like, you can get in and get out and get on with your day in less than 10 minutes. But it's just a good way to kind of think about things a little bit differently. A lot of the things we've talked about here today, and then a bunch of other stuff. Just how to think about it a little bit more simply, which makes it easier to do the right thing. If you can really sort of simplify it and think about it in a different way. So that's all it is. I'm not trying to be like Joe Rogan of podcasts, but I'll just be the Jason Anthoine of Storycast, and that'll be good
enough. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I want to talk about, because here on Lead to Greatness, let's talk about great leaders. What does that look like to you? And what are some of the key qualifications or qualities and attributes that you believe makes a great leader?
Yeah. I talk about this a lot with my own teams, current and past. And people are like, I just can't wait till I'm in charge and then I get to do things my way, that kind of thing. Yeah. I want that promotion. I need that title, all that. And they're just waiting on somebody to come around with a magic wand and go, ding, you're a leader. The leader has nothing to do with any of that. The leader is who you are. The leader is what you think, feel, say, and do all day long, regardless of your title or regardless of your role or regardless of whether people would naturally see you as a leader or not. You become a leader by demonstrating leadership. And so to me, the things, and this is just me, the things that really, the attributes and the qualities of good leaders in my mind are trust, empathy, expertise, and courage. And it's kind of threefold. So expect these things of yourself, be these things for your team, and then expect these things of your team and from your team. And so if you want to be trusted, then you also have to trust. If you want to be seen as having expertise, then you have to be able to help other people become experts. You want to be courageous, then you have to help other people also be courageous. And so to me, it's just, and for it may be 4 to 5 things for other people, maybe 50 things for other people, maybe it'd just be one thing for other people. But to me, it's those. It's hard to be a leader, for example, if you don't really have any expertise, like we talked about earlier, and your career, you were a maintenance mechanic in the U.S. Army for the Abrams tanks, right? If you hadn't known anything about Abrams tanks, do you think that once you became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and you started talking about it and you said silly things that don't have anything to do with that tank, that anybody would want to be a follower of yours? Heck no. So it's a combination of all those things, but expertise is certainly one of them. I want to be coached by somebody who knows what they're doing. And so that's a really good way to be a leader, is to be really good at what somebody else is trying to also do. So to me, it's the combination of those things, but it's not just who you are and you're doing that. You're doing that with and for your team, and you're expecting that from them, because at some point they're going to be you, and you want them to succeed. And now's the time to help them start doing that.
Jason, that's good. That's good. What are some practical leadership growth tips, tool advice that you can share with the Lead to Greatness community to help us reach our greatest potential?
Oh gosh, it's sort of like this crazy architect book. Like, there's leadership lessons all over. There's probably some at your church. There's probably some at your coffee club. There's probably some with the people that you go fishing with. Like, there's ways to learn leadership all the time. And so just to me, it comes down to kind of being curious about it. So if you want to learn more about leadership, then be curious about all kinds of leaders in all kinds of different ways. Some might be really good, people that you might consider to be heroes. Some might be the exact opposite of that, but they still were leading people. So what lessons can we learn from that we might not want to do, or, might be different in a different context? But it's just, I think it takes you just being curious about and wanting to get better, and then investing the time to do that. But, if there was a silver bullet that everybody could do, everybody already be doing it. So there's not one, but there is one for you, and you got to figure out what that is yourself.
Be curious. Be curious. I love it. I love it, Jason. Jason, this is great.
Cedric,
this is
thank you. Wow,
man,
this has been great.
Yeah, you definitely.
You made me think about a lot of things that are kind of hard to explain, but you just asked the questions in such a great way that
you definitely dropped some knowledge bombs on us today. This is really good. and listen, y'all go over and subscribe to the podcast, and to learn more about Jason and what he's doing. And Jason, what I want you to do, if someone wants to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
Oh, yeah, that's easy. So if y'all are on LinkedIn, so am I. So I say a lot of these things there. And then, of course, my website, jasonanthoine.com. There's a lot of helpful hints and tips and things you can learn just by looking at the website. You don't have to hire me, although I would love it if you did. But even if you don't, there's a lot of ways that you can learn and grow your own, leadership style.
Jason, this is good, man. I really thank you for being on the Lead to Greatness podcast. Thank you for all of the knowledge and wisdom that you have shared with us on today. I want to do one more thing. It just popped in my head.
Okay.
I'm like, man, we're talking about 35 plus years of experience.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. If you can go back through those 35 years, or something just pop out to you right now, what is the greatest leadership lesson that you ever learned, and what was life like, or your thought process, perspective, whatever it is, afterwards?
Wow, that's a great question. I got to think about that for a second. So I used to do internal communications for a company called Southwire. They make wiring cables, so all the stuff that's in your house, all the stuff that's up and down the street to deliver electricity mostly. And there was a human resources leader there, Mike Wiggins. He probably had the biggest impact on me just because he was just simple, guy from small town in Alabama, who started working at Southwire when he was young and eventually became the chief human resources officer. And it was like a lesson a day. Every time you would have any conversation with him about most anything, whether it was a meeting or not, like, there's so much that can be learned. And the lesson I took from that was a lot of leaders in those roles, not necessarily at that company, but at any company, think that for them to be the leader, they've got to have all of the power. And what I learned from Mike and the way he treated me and other people at that organization, and just people in general, was that the best way to have power is just to give it all away.
Yes.
You make other people powerful. You make them who they're supposed to be. You help them become who they already are. Like, that's the secret. It's not about you, it's about them. For somebody else, it wasn't about them, it was about you. Now it's your turn.
Man.
He never said that out loud. All he did was demonstrate that. And I was like, that's probably the biggest lesson that I've ever learned about leadership.
On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, I want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
We want to thank you for joining us today on the Lead to Greatness podcast. So remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace.